Hey, I'm Jess.
Hi, I'm Ryan, and you're listening to Your Therapist is Not Okay.
On this episode, we're going to be diving into the topic that your therapist is not apolitical. We're going to be looking at the current events that Ryan and I, have kind of navigated as therapists and discuss your therapist and politics. Because your therapist is not okay and your therapist is not apolitical. Today's episode feels like it's going to be a bit of a heavier one. Hey, Ryan?
It does, yeah, it does, and it was one I had suggested because it seems timely and important to do now. And so when you listen to this, we're recording this on the 22nd of January. Um, it just feels like the right time to have this conversation and address therapy and politics. But it's raw and fresh, I think, for both of us.
Yeah, I mean, we've been seeing so many political events over the past few years that have kind of
Mhm.
impacted our practice. But we also have had a number of things happen in America. And you are from New York, and I think that this has really landed importantly on your heart. Hey, Ryan?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, it's something I've been coming in and out of this week. And we'll be wrapping up with a little bit of our thoughts on how to take care of yourself. But I've been trying to be very mindful of taking care of myself while staying up to date. So I think the first thing I just want us to discuss together is what it's been like for each of us to be therapists during major political events. I mean, if you think about it, we both started doing kind of private practice. I think you in probably 2014, me in 2015. And obviously, since those years, there have been a slew of major political events and movements that we've been seeing clients during.
Yeah, I mean, I'd be remiss to think that it just started around that time, but I started my practice in Scotland. And for many people in Canada, that wouldn't matter too much, but it mattered for me. I literally landed during a reformation of whether or not Scotland was going to be independent or not. And I got to deal with the aftermath of people's heartache, worry, what it meant for them to continue within the UK. And that was really important. A couple years later in my practice, I navigated Brexit. And you would have too, Ryan, where
I did, yeah.
a lot of my clients that were kind of in that sphere were very surprised, confused, scared, didn't know if they were going to have to leave families, partners, friends, what was going to happen to them after their university careers, and other people's opinions that were very for Brexit. And navigating these diverse opinions was tricky for me. As
Hmm.
somebody who is Canadian, I felt like I got to have a nice kind of more neutral stance, um,
Hmm.
especially because the UK really focuses on accents. And so being able to have a Canadian accent meant that I clearly was not a part of this in a very intimate way. But actually, it really impacted me seeing my clients and their fear about what their futures were going to look like.
Absolutely. And just like thinking about that, takes me back to when we were kind of planning this episode, this um, feminist stance that I think Judith Butler coined that was the personal is political.
Yeah.
And we see that constantly in the therapy space, that our clients are directly impacted by politics. So I think some folks might say that like, oh, it's political, it's not personal. It's very much the opposite because the things that we're talking about that our clients have experienced that we have been experiencing sometimes at the same time as them, it changes the way their day-to-day life happens, right? If you're thinking about with Brexit, for example, am I going to be allowed to stay here because I'm from France? Am I going to be allowed to raise my kids because my kids are British citizens, but I'm not?
Hmm.
And all these questions were floating around with that time as one example. And something that is, I think, really important for me as a therapist, not always easy, but can be almost second nature at other times, is having empathy across opinions. Having this stance of like, even if I don't agree with someone, being able to think, I understand how you ended up there. I understand maybe the fears, the hopes that are tied up in that opinion, or how the events in your life and the way you were raised maybe led to this opinion that might be different than mine, but I don't need to hate you for. In fact, I can empathize and yeah.
I think that like those are really easy examples of how politics can kind of be with us because we got
Mm,
to kind of be a little bit separate. For me, in 2018 with the Me Too movement, that was a very interesting time for me as a therapist, as a woman. There
mm,
was a lot of energy in my office around power
hmm
and a lot of very intimate stories of how very few women I've ever met were not impacted by this movement about this aspect of abuse. And I think that to see that and to see that momentum was something that gave me a lot of energy.
mm,
It definitely hurt me, but as a trauma specialist, I have those capacities to kind of be able to navigate that. That one hit me quite personally because it was something that is not only my specialization in working with trauma and specifically abuse, but also being able to support people that have never come forward before. And the other one that hit me quite personally, obviously, it hit us all universally, was COVID.
mm,
And that was a very tricky time when it came to vaccinations. And as somebody who is vaccinated and does believe it, it gave me that exact thing of listening to people who were, I guess we would label them anti-vaxxers, but then to hear their fear and what's going on and what they were navigating, it actually gave me empathy within a scope that I was impacted with.
mm.
So while I was Canadian during things in the UK that were quite impactful, these are some of the things that actually hit me quite powerfully. It was really hard in COVID when everyone else was getting laid off and losing their jobs. I was terrified that I also was not going to have a job. As a
Hmm.
psychotherapist in private practice, if I don't work, I don't eat. Like
Yeah.
I'm not salaried in that kind of way. And so being able to kind of see that fear, wondering what was going to happen to the field of mental health, providing care while I was also facing the exact same worry, and also the same worry of what COVID was going to do to myself, to my family members, to those I love, seeing the numbers. I think during that time, we don't talk about it often, but how often were we checking that website that had all the numbers and looking what was happening across the globe?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I'm thinking about Me Too. Like during the Me Too movement, I was working at Kingdom Abuse Survivors Project, which is an agency in Kirkcaldy and that works across Fife in Scotland. This is a county in Scotland, and working with adult survivors of childhood sexual abuse. And so we had a huge influx of clients coming in. So I did see the kind of the beauty of that movement and that it was empowering for many of my clients, but it was also a heavy time. Something that was interesting and different for me as a non-binary person, as male passing, that like a step outside of that movement, but then also getting to work with men at that agency too who had been sexually assaulted. And knowing that the reason that I chose that agency that was about an hour away from where I lived was because it was the only agency that would allow men and non-women presenting people to get therapy or even be in the building.
Wow. Yeah.
And then that's pretty common in the UK that it's still and there's an element of the desire for safety and protecting clients that I understand and respect. On the other hand, it has this kind of this aspect of thinking that it only happens to one type of person, that it's a women's issue. Where I really liked what came out of the Me Too movement of actually this is a men's issue. Men for the most part are the ones causing this problem. And so also it needs to be men who are addressing this problem.
Yeah. And it was the kind of thing that was also not started necessarily by white women or by
Mm,
women that um, were necessarily just cis, that it could be a widespread topic. And
mm,
that momentum doesn't feel like it's there anymore, but it was really incredible to be a part, to be an active healer during that time. I felt like I was really doing something important.
Mm,
There's not a lot of times I'll stand up in my practice, mostly so I can be a safe space for everyone. But there was a time that you and I stood up for something pretty important, Ryan, in our company,
mm,
and that was drag bans.
yep. I mean, I do remember that time. That was a really interesting time that's maybe coming back again. We're gonna see where drag performers were not allowed to perform in mostly in the South of the United States.
Yeah.
And yeah, that was around the time that we really had a big push at Centered Self, Jess's company, to record a lot of videos about Pride
Yeah.
that were complicating pride too, and talking about like all the various different experiences that queer folks with under that umbrella might have, how it might feel to have different types of bodies at pride, how it might feel to be, as Hannah Gadsby says, not a party gay, where your favorite sound is a teacup hitting a saucer. Where do you go during Pride? So we talked about a lot of these things. We talked about honoring and respecting our elders too, who lived through the AIDS crisis, and we got the opportunity to interview an amazing friend of Jess's, who had a lot to share about his own experiences with that
Yeah.
too. So yeah, there are these specific times when we will kind of take a stance, and for me, one of the times that really comes up is when a political situation is harming people. There are political situations for me that are about kind of a sincere disagreement about the best way to solve a mutual problem, right?
Yep.
Say, a nation is in debt, and there's differing opinions on how to resolve that debt. That to me is a very different political problem than these people should not get rights.
Yep.
We're talking about who should have rights, who should be safe, who should be welcome in their home. That for me is directly impacting individual people and only impacting people in a negative way.
Mm.
And that's when I think, okay, I need to make sure that those people know that I'm safe for them.
And that act in itself is political, I think, to be able to be somebody that's like, I'm a safe space for you because
Mm.
you're not feeling safe right now. And Ryan,
Mhm.
you were the very first person to talk to me about this with the States, but even in Canada, that that rights and laws are not necessarily the same thing, that and
Mm.
how things can be taken away. And you were talking to me about that personally, about yourself, that like you may have rights right now, but they're not laws. They're not into canon. They haven't been signed and passed, and like it's a bill. And that was really important for me to kind of remember the precarity of some of these things that have been passed, so to speak, or accepted that aren't necessarily as stable as I might have thought they were. And we can see that with some of the things that have happened, specifically with Roe v. Wade and things like that, that have impacted a number of people that seemed quite stable. And to
Mhm.
realize, no, there's a precarity even here. And
Absolutely.
navigating that kind of fear, even within ourselves as therapists, of like, what can be taken away when we think we've made this forward progress? What happens when that might have been a facade. At least it can
Mm.
feel like that.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. There is that absolute precarity. There are things that have kind of like gone back and forth between having rights and not having rights. We've had many waves of progress and regress. Right now, especially in terms of queer rights, we are in a period of regress in the States. Um,
Let me ask you that question actually,
okay.
before we skirt around it.
Uh,
Ryan, how are you feeling this week? What's been going on for you?
this week, um, it feels like a week of defeat.
Okay.
Um, there's at least for me, there's a sense of all of the things that have been feared through our recent political campaign in the US that are coming to fruition. President Trump is passing executive orders that are doing exactly what he said he would do, a
Hmm.
lot of which is in opposition to women's rights, in opposition to queer rights, even explicitly saying that there are only two genders, male and female, which some states had have a different stance on. Now, a lot of this is unclear as to where it will go. And I don't want to dive too deep into my political theory background, which is a different life. But just as there was a precarity with rights that are based in court precedent, like Roe v. Wade, which, had we codified them into law instead, would have been much more stable and much more difficult to repeal. Executive orders are limited in their power. So some of these executive orders that Trump has declared and signed will be challenged in court
Yeah.
because he doesn't necessarily have the power to override a past piece of legislature with an executive order. That's not a real thing. He can't do that. So we'll see what comes of it in the courts in some cases. And some of the things that he's done, he absolutely has the power to do. And I'm also in particular really on my mind have been immigrants,
Yeah.
asylum seekers, DACA recipients, which I don't know if you know a lot about DACA up there. It's a program that Obama started to provide temporary right to remain in the United States for folks who were children and were undocumented immigrants.
Hmm.
And so they're often referred to as dreamers.
Hmm.
And their status has been very up in the air since the previous Trump presidency and is will be probably challenged more aggressively. So thinking about people who have spent really their entire lives in the States, their entire lives, perhaps now, probably now, you have professional careers in the United States, have gone to university in the United States. Um, they're now in increased danger, and my heart is really with them as well.
And I think with what you're saying, there is an aspect of ricochet or of like, how will they be treated even if these don't get passed? What might this give license to treat those who are going to be targeted by these executive orders?
Mhm.
And what level of fear might be in some really kind of vulnerable situations for people?
I definitely am thinking, as you're saying that, about the impact of political rhetoric on day-to-day life. So there is an impact that we hear from our clients and that we ourselves experience in some cases when a politician says something that hits home in a hurtful way directly to us. But then there's that, yes, that additional impact of now what do others feel that they can say or do to me?
What does this give license to? Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. And that also feels like one of the things in our job that is so important as healers, as psychotherapists, is again, how do we provide a realm of safety when you don't feel safe? Not just internally, but probably with real cause externally. What's happening around you? How are people treating you? And this is not new by any stretch, but as you just said, and what I was kind of inferring is that when there is a law or something happening politically, what does that do for you internally? How do people look at you? How are you treated? And what kind of freedoms do you feel like you no longer are allowed to exercise?
Yeah, absolutely. And for some of this, I feel I have kind of a responsibility to stick around. I'm lucky to have the privilege that there are probably places I could relatively easily go to be safer in other parts of the world, because I have connections, and that is a big privilege that I have. And I feel I have kind of an obligation to be here and to stand my ground and take care of clients when I do start seeing clients in New York, which I'm not seeing quite yet, but when I do start seeing clients in New York, being able to be there for them, be a safe haven for them, and allow my relative safety because of protective privileges that I have outside of being queer, like being white and being highly educated, that protect me. and I want to be able to use that protection as an umbrella for others too.
Yeah.
I'm also in a, who knows what's going to happen nationally, but I'm also in New York City. It's a relatively progressive part of the states. Um, and we'll just see. We'll see what happens, and I'm gonna stick it out as long as I possibly can.
And you can always come to Toronto.
I'm a little curious too, though, as like, we're talking about the US, your southern neighbors. I'm curious kind of what's on your mind this week, watching the dumpster fire below you.
We'll probably get into this in the next point, but I think one of the ways that I try to keep myself safe is allowing myself the freedom to just read a book instead of trying to have my finger on every pulse. Like that has kept me kind of safe. But it was difficult. I was just back. We were both back in Scotland to present at a conference and then to present at the university in Edinburgh.
Hmm.
And all of the dear friends that I've made in Edinburgh would make the quip, "Oh, I hear that you're, as Canadians, about to become part of the US."
Mm,
That didn't feel so funny to me, Ryan.
no.
That felt kind of scary to me. And we are navigating right now as a country tariffs. There are things that are happening in that we're trying to navigate, like what we would say. David Suzuki has spoken up, a couple big Canadian names.
Mm,
We've had some past prime ministers speak up. It just feels like there's so much unknown right now
yeah.
that, for me at least, it's almost like that's harder to navigate because I don't quite know where to put my fear. Like when fear is unknown, anxiety takes over and tries to kind of give you a foothold into what you're supposed to be fearful of. But when it's constantly like, I don't know what the future's going to hold, that for me again creates a precarity of like,
Mm,
how valid are my fears? Are they valid? Can I be afraid? And I can hear myself in the office telling my clients how valid their fears are and to like for us to explore them. And this is one of those kind of both end situations where I can hear myself saying that, and sometimes it feels like I'm also telling myself that I have permission. One of my least favorite things that has happened in the last 9 years, I guess,
mm,
are all the jokes or all the kind of things that can happen that make fun of very scary things that are happening. Um, I really don't like the humor part of it because it kind of takes away some of the sting of the fear, and I want to just allow myself not to have to laugh at something that I feel like isn't funny. Um,
mm.
Little hands, like how many cartoons have we seen? Like all of those
Right.
things. I just find that they like undermine the real fear that people go through. And so I think for myself, this week I've just been allowing myself to feel and
Yeah.
then to be there with my friends and to be there with you, with my
Mm,
clients. Because for me, that gives a level of validity to what I'm feeling and to what everyone else is feeling. That it, if I don't feel like laughing, I'm not going to laugh. And I haven't felt like laughing this week about anything about political kind of ideologies or what's happening.
I relate to that. Yeah, I've not really found anything funny either, and I really appreciate that you're saying that. I have received jokes from other people, actually not this week. I don't think that many people are laughing this week.
Mhm.
But in the past, I mean, thinking about, I got some really disgusting jokes during Black Lives Matter that I was like, you know what? This is not funny. This is not. And I mean, I lost friends over that. That I'm like, I'm not gonna, don't send me that. And they're like, oh, don't be a snowflake or whatever. I am a very beautiful snowflake, thank you.
Intricate.
Intricate, yes. I'm very complicated. Um, so I really appreciate you saying that. And I also like, while it can maybe there's some catharsis in being able to make childish jokes about a political opponent, I agree that it does a disservice to the seriousness of the danger that some people are in. And I
Yeah.
have noticed people taking it a little more seriously this second term of President Trump's, where there's more maybe critique of what he's doing and less critique of appearance that just seems like, childish. It doesn't really address it.
Yeah. I think that that kind of moves us into thinking about what we do.
Yeah.
For me, not laughing and taking things seriously is a political act.
Hmm.
It kind of dampens the mood, and I want it to be dampened. If I'm the wet blanket when I think that we should be, I'm okay to do that, even if I kind of bring down the mood a bit. Um, for me, it's important for me to say, no, I don't want to joke right now. This isn't funny to me. It allows others to feel like they can also have that space. But I think that for me as a psychotherapist, I do have clients that are living in Toronto or Ontario that are from America and giving them a safe space to be able to share anything they want. Now, it would be pretty obvious to anyone listening what our politics are, wouldn't you say, Ryan?
I was actually thinking about that a minute ago. I was like, I've never been one for subtlety anyway, so there we are.
Well, and we actually had a big discussion about this, listener, Ryan and I, about how honest we wanted to be.
Hmm.
And we actually really decided for this episode, for your benefit, for our vulnerability, to be honest with you as we always have been. And
Hmm.
so I think that comes at a risk. Any kind of vulnerability always does, but
Does.
it would be a very poor conversation if we didn't talk about the real feelings we had. It would feel like, what's the point? I think that's what we kind of landed on, wasn't it?
It is, and when we were kind of planning how to talk about this and thinking, about the political aspects in our lives, um, I shared that, I think that therapy is a political act, that what we do is itself a political thing. And you were sharing some of like ways in which you think of it as political.
Yeah.
Yeah. Some of that we've been touching on so far, but is there anything you'd kind of like to add or elaborate on that?
Actually, yes. One of the things that I've always thought about therapy as being political is that in our day and age, we often listen to our own kind of choir. I don't know how to say it. Like we sing in the same choir we want to sing in, right? We
Right.
underline the things we agree with. I mean, in technology now, we usually get sent the same things that we're going to probably nod our head at. In either realm of politics.
Right.
You don't get that option in the therapy room.
That's true.
Yeah, and I love that. I've learned so much more from my clients that might have a thought that I get to lean into, listen to, and learn from, and be empathic to. Like
Hmm.
for me, I think that is one of the most incredible political things that I get to do. That in the therapy room, we're not debating politics. I'm listening to people's fears. I'm listening to histories of what they've gone through or what they've learned about life. And I'm listening so closely so that I can hear them. And that allows me to set some of my own biases, understandings, histories to the side, really, in order to then give myself to a client. And that has taught me how to do that in real life too. I mean, therapy's real life, but you know what I mean, outside the therapy room.
Yes. No, absolutely. I mean, I think in this session, there's a relative political neutrality. Um, that sometimes it's interesting to see when clients kind of like nudge at that a little bit. They're
Hmm.
like, "Well, what do you think about this?" And I'm like, well, let's talk about what you think about it. And part of that is because I do want to make space for people to learn, explore, and understand. And I want all types of people with all types of beliefs to be able to increase their self-awareness, increase their well-being. Part of it is because I have a bias that if you're more self-aware, you're probably going to land more in my corner of politics anyway. But I have no interest in manipulating people into that. What, you're laughing? I'm not wrong.
It just the way you just said that sounded so serious and like, like so educated. But I'm like, I just heard what you said. If
Yeah,
people are
well,
self-aware, they'll lean into my understanding of politics.
as I said, your therapist is not apolitical.
I also love the little shoulder tilt you just did. You're like, what?
What? Yeah, 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 definitely, feeling a little cheeky. But yeah, I mean, it's all so much of the stuff that we're talking about is based in fear and hope and whatever someone is afraid of, even if it's not something I'm afraid of, or maybe I have a different reaction to that fear than they have. I
Yep.
want to be able to hear them out and let them process it in like a full and healthy way so they can arrive at a conclusion that feels life-giving and authentic for them. And all the time I'm like, that might not be the same as what it is for me. Just like in very different, like less political ways, like the way someone heals from trauma, I can't assume it's going to be the way I have or the way my other clients have. It has to be unique and specific to them.
Yeah. At the end of the day, if a client leaves my office feeling held, secure, maybe even being able to just dump some of this so I can hold it with them, I've
Mm,
done my job perfectly. That they can feel like I want to come back and keep doing this work, that this is valid work, I've done my job perfectly. And for me, that is so important because
mm,
I am a safe space, even if what we're talking about might feel very vulnerable, incredibly risky, maybe even shame-provoking, with the fears that I can hold in another. The biggest thing that I've had to learn as a psychotherapist, especially since I started, is how I can hold my own fear and hold another's.
hmm
And that my fear is still valid, but it doesn't have to necessarily be the thing first and foremost in a room, that I can hold both. And that feels really important to me.
mm,
And you're right. Most clients, we're not neutral.
mm,
Most clients will kind of know a little bit about who we are. If I can circle back to some of the bigger campaigns that have happened, it was very rare, if ever, that a client would come to talk to me about abuse and feel like I wouldn't be able to meet them
mm,
because I am a woman, right? Like, I
mm,
think there are some things that are just like, I think you're going to get this, Jess. And that makes sense to me. And I think for me, being able to be that spot for clients that feel like they can bring anything because they can. A client can bring anything. And even if it might be a thought that I haven't had or an experience I haven't had, at the end of the day, I'm skilled at listening to somebody and understanding what they're going through. And for me, that is one of the biggest things right now. Right now, when fear is rampant and people don't know what's going to happen next, the biggest political act that I can do right now, it's going to sound trite, but I don't think it is just love.
hmm
To look someone in the eyes and offer them myself and kindness. Right now, when everyone's scared and we don't know who's safe, my political act is being safe.
And there's part of that, and I very much agree, and it can be sometimes taboo to really lean into and focus on as a therapist and talk about in trainings that a lot of what we do really has this principle of love underlying it, of love, of unconditional positive regard, that like there's a person that's always in your corner. That's something that I sometimes when clients say like I like talking to you because I like having someone neutral, and I always take that to mean not in my family system or friend system. So like I'm not part of it in the way they are. And on the other hand, sometimes I think, oh, I am not neutral. Like I am 100% on your side.
Oh, sweetheart, you think I'm
Right.
neutral right now. Yeah.
Right. In the sense that I might hold you accountable for whatever bullshit you might be on in this moment and might call that out or call that in.
But I think what they're saying to you is that
Yeah.
they won't be ostracized,
Yes.
that they can say something and they don't have to worry about losing you.
or that I have this bias that their friend group or family should like be a certain way, that I want it to be what it needs to be for them. But then I also think about some of the work that I'm doing right now that I'm focusing on and how I do that politically as well. There's some of this in the admin of therapy in helping run organizations, or I do a lot of work right now consulting with practitioners. So for me, taking care of therapists and helping them be the best therapists they can be is a really important part of allowing them to be have their feet on their ground and be the best therapists that they can be to create change, and also to push for access to therapy and find ways to increase the access folks have to therapy, and to be a voice that, encourages and supports organizations to have diverse therapists so that clients, if they want, can have therapists that match particular identities of theirs. That can be a huge make or break for a client being able to really open up and get the full benefit. And then being able to also advocate for those therapists to have good working conditions and good support. Um, so a lot of the kind of behind the scenes stuff of therapy can also be, for me at least, a political engine. Everything about therapy, to me, I don't know if it's just because of that briefly mentioned political theory past, but everything that I do, I see as being political in some way.
Well, as you said before, the personal is political. And what we've gone through, how we navigate life, what we've been told.
Mm-hmm.
Even, I mean, one of the things that clients often come to therapy for is to become somebody that can understand themselves and maybe break away from old patterns, absolutely, but also to recognize when those patterns are coming in. And that is navigating the political and who they are and what they've been taught and what they want to believe or how they might feel different from their family systems, all of those things.
Mm-hmm.
Just thinking about time, we
Yep.
this has been a long one. What if we talk about our last point? Because I really didn't want
Let's
to end
do.
this without talking about how to take care of yourself during this time.
Yep.
Would you give any advice to clients right now? When it comes to, we're talking a lot about kind of the unknown. What kind of advice would you give to clients?
I would say exactly something I've said to clients a million times in the past. Put your phone down.
Okay, go on.
Doom scrolling will not save the world. I've talked to so many clients and therapists and just people in general who feel kind of caught between being upset by while they're doom scrolling, feeling overwhelmed, exhausted, but feeling like they have this obligation to keep doing that because what kind of person are they if they're not paying attention, if they're not advocating? Um, and I would just say you suffering is not going to help anyone. So what I recommend to clients or therapists is to take your awareness of current events in manageable doses, so that
Mhm.
you go to a few sources that are whatever the sources are that you find trustworthy and reliable, and you'll use your discernment to choose what those are and get the updates that you need and keep it to a set amount of time. You could read the news for half an hour or something like that, but if it becomes something that you're checking 90 times a day, it's not helpful for you to be so distressed that you can't function. It's not helping.
Piece of advice I always give clients actually it comes with burnout. What you're
Mm.
talking about can like lean to burnout. And I often talk to clients when it comes to burnout. Do something frivolous.
Hmm.
Like, and frivolous for me is a wonderful word because often like it's usually not that frivolous. Like, having a bubble bath. I
I
was
love a bubble bath, a
I
bubble
know.
bath.
I know. I was thinking about that character from Big Mouth. Um, or allowing yourself a whole evening where the phone's in the bedroom and you're lying on the couch and you're watching your favorite TV show, even if you've seen it 100 times.
Mhm.
Or you're watching a silly movie that just allows you to turn off your brain. Or you allow yourself to actually take the day off when you have a day off. And the only things on your to-do list are the things you want to do. Can be
Hmm.
quite a beautiful thing to write a to-do list that says, take a nap, have a bath, read that book that you want to read. And a lot of times clients are like, well, I can't do that. That's frivolous. That is the frivolous. Do the
Hmm.
things that allow you space to turn off, to build up that battery. And sometimes building up that battery is going and having silly chats with your friends or doing something fun. It is very cold in Toronto today. We are in a polar vortex, but taking a walk, getting some fresh air, doing whatever it is that gives you joy can feel really frivolous when you're always on. You always feel like you need to check. You're always kind of feeling like there's pressure to do. And when you're constantly having that pressure to do, it can lead to burnout, especially when we're scared. I said before that anxiety often makes us feel like we need to have some sort of control. Allowing ourselves to just relax into our bodies can
Hmm.
actually then allow our bodies to heal a little bit.
Yes. Yes. Absolutely. And I think all of that applies to therapists as much as it does to clients. Really, the self-care is no different. One thing I would kind of add for therapists is when you're on days you're seeing clients, in particular, be protective of your peace.
Mhm.
Those are probably not the days to be immersed in the news. Don't be scrolling through whatever's distressing for you. Like if Instagram or Facebook or the news is distressing for you right now, that's not something to check in between clients. That's a good time to
Mhm.
take some deep breaths, make yourself a cup of tea.
Yeah. And that's actually literally what I had said in the beginning when you said how I'm doing. Like, well, right now I'm not checking the news because I want the bandwidth I can have for clients. It's not to be uninformed, it's to be able to protect my peace, exactly as you just said. I love that. It kind of ties in perfectly. As psychotherapists, we always feel the need to also be doing, to be productive or to create progress or be impressive. But sometimes the biggest thing we can do is just to be with another. And that takes a lot of energy and a lot of bandwidth. So doing that well is paramount in times of fear.
Absolutely. I think that's the place to stop for us.
Thank you so much for listening to everyone today. Thank you for being able to be with us on this, as today wasn't necessarily the most uh, fun of podcasts, but it felt important for us. If you need help, if you need to talk to somebody, if this is the time to do so, reach out. If it's at Centered Self, feel free. If it's with somebody you trust or there's an agency that you want to connect with, do it.
Hmm.
The biggest thing that you can do right now is not be alone in your fear.
Yes. Yep. Those of you who are afraid right now, who are struggling, my heart goes out to you. You're not alone in that.
No,
Yep. And as exactly as Jess said, get the help you need. You're worth it.
you are worth it. Thanks for listening, everyone.
Bye.
Thanks so much for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, check out our others. And stay tuned for even more episodes coming up.
Follow us and leave a review on Spotify or wherever you listen to your podcasts. And please tell your friends.
You can also follow us on Instagram too at Your Therapist Is Not Okay. Also, if you have any questions that you want us to answer, send us a DM there. We would love to answer your questions. And a lot of our topics come from listeners just like you.